Welcome, focused learners, to this explainer. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on a truly fascinating, yet often overlooked aspect of American history. We're looking at the actual engineers behind America's most powerful political families. You know, when we think of presidents, we almost always just picture the individual sitting right there in the Oval Office. But history? Well, history shows us that the foundation for that ultimate seat of power is frequently laid decades earlier by the very people who raised them. Okay, let's dive into this. Who really builds a United States president? Honestly, if you look at the data across centuries of American history, we start to see parents not just as caregivers, but as highly strategic architects, financiers, and literally campaign managers. Today, we're going to look at exactly how parents built these massive political dynasties, effectively passing power down from generation to generation. Phase 1. The early aristocracy, wealth, land, and the American Revolution. In the earliest days of the United States, the model for dynasty building was deeply tied to immense agricultural wealth and direct, on-the-ground involvement in the founding of the country. These parents essentially set up the very first blueprints for what a political family could even look like. And John Adams' staggering resume is the perfect example of this. Just look at this list. He wasn't just the second U.S. president and the first vice president. The guy was deeply involved in the Continental Congress. He actually signed the Declaration of Independence, authored the Massachusetts Constitution, and served as the very first U.S. ambassador to both Great Britain and the Netherlands. He even defended the British in the Boston Massacre case. When you lay it all out like this, you really see how incredibly high the bar was set. This wasn't just a father, this was a historical titan whose monumental achievements essentially made his son, John Quincy Adams, political success almost completely inevitable. John Quincy was perfectly set up for success right from the jump based on this massive foundation. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this early blueprint wasn't just drawn by the fathers. We absolutely have to shift our focus to maternal influence here. Abigail Adams, John's wife and John Quincy's mother, was arguably the most influential woman in revolutionary America. Back when society had incredibly strict, limited expectations for women, she was brilliantly intelligent and deeply involved politically. She basically served as the ultimate, albeit private, political consultant. John Adams took her opinions incredibly seriously, constantly consulting her on political matters through their letters. She was an absolute pillar of this early dynasty. Phase 2. Multi-generational webs, entrenching power over centuries. Because as we move into the 19th century, this power transforms into sprawling, multi-generational machines. It's no longer just about a single successful father handing off influence to his son. The Harrison family brilliantly illustrates this massive shift. Just look at this timeline. Their influence spans hundreds of years. Their ancestor Benjamin Harrison I arrives in America in 1633. By 1776, Benjamin Harrison V is a wealthy planter serving as a delegate to the Continental Congress and actually signing the Declaration of Independence. Fast forward to 1841, William Henry Harrison becomes the 9th president. In the 1850s, John Scott Harrison serves 2 terms in Congress. And finally, in 1889, Benjamin Harrison becomes the 23rd president. We can see exactly how deeply entrenched one single family can become in the very fabric of American politics over nearly 3 centuries. It's like a giant puzzle coming together over time. And sitting right in the middle of that sprawling web is John Scott Harrison. He holds a totally unique historical distinction. He is literally the only man in American history to be both the son of a U.S. president and the father of a U.S. president. But actually, what's truly wild about him is an anecdote from after his death in 1878. In a shocking turn of events, his body was famously stolen right out of the family tomb to be used to teach medical anatomy at Ohio Medical College. His son, the future president Benjamin Harrison, actually discovered his father's naked body hanging in a chute at the college while ironically searching for a totally different stolen body. Unbelievable, right? That bizarre event actually forced Ohio to pass new legislation regarding medical colleges and unclaimed bodies just to deter grave robbing. Anyway, moving past those early planters, we start to see wealthy fathers using slightly different tactics, specifically appointed stepping stones. Take Alphonso Taft, the father of William Howard Taft. He used his legal background to serve as Secretary of War, Attorney General, and as an ambassador to Austria-Hungary and Russia. Then you have James Roosevelt I, FDR's father. He used his immense wealth as a major campaign donor for Grover Cleveland to build up these really high-level diplomatic connections. They were strategically using political appointments and massive financial contributions to build the scaffolding that their sons would eventually climb. Let's move to and see how this builds, because a really stark contrast emerges here. In the 18th and 19th centuries, influence was completely dominated by wealthy planters, generals, and diplomats. Sure, their influence was incredibly powerful, but it was often a bit more passive or tied directly to land and military rank. But as we cross into the 20th century, the demographic shifts drastically to corporate executives, heavy financiers, and active campaign managers. The entire model becomes highly engineered. Phase 3. Modern political machines. The era of strategic engineering. Which brings us to the climax of our evolutionary arc, parents aggressively managing, financing, and relentlessly campaigning for their children's path to power. They weren't just passing down a famous name or an estate anymore, and there is perhaps no better example of this than Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. Look at his arsenal here. In the public sector, he was the ambassador to the UK, chair of the SEC, and chair of the Maritime Commission, all under FDR. Meanwhile, in the private sector, he generated staggering wealth through real estate, Hollywood movies, and liquor importation. Now, he always intended his eldest son, Joe Jr., to be president, but when Joe Jr. tragically died in World War II, Joseph Kennedy Sr. seamlessly pivoted this entire master plan. He used his vast array of connections and that immense wealth to propel his next oldest son, John F. Kennedy, directly into the White House. He was absolutely pivotal in electing him. But right alongside Joseph was his wife, Rose Kennedy, and she completely evolved the mother's role in dynasty building. Remember Abigail Adams and her private, behind-the-scenes letters? Well, Rose Kennedy, who was the daughter of Boston Mayor John Fitzgerald, took that maternal influence and pushed it squarely into the spotlight. She transitioned from a private homemaker raising 9 children into a highly active, boots-on-the-ground public campaign worker for her son's various political runs. So the crucial point is the number 104. That is the incredible age Rose Kennedy lived to before passing away in 1995. I mean, think about the sheer scale of that timeline. She not only lived through the entire presidency of her son and tragically witnessed the assassinations of both JFK and RFK, but she actually outlived the parents of Lyndon B. Johnson, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and Bill Clinton. She literally outlived LBJ and Nixon themselves. It perfectly symbolizes the vast, enduring, overarching power of the Kennedy dynasty. The ultimate resume builder. The Bush family blueprint. Next up, this brings us to the most staggering buildup of qualifications orchestrated by a family before a son even announces a run for the highest office. We all know George H.W. Bush was the 41st president and the 43rd vice president under Reagan, but the foundation beneath that is just immense. Director of the CIA, ambassador to the UN in China, head of the Republican National Committee, a U.S. representative from Texas, and a WW2 veteran. Before George W. Bush ever ran for office, his father had already meticulously compiled what is arguably the single most qualified political resume in American history. The institutional knowledge and the sheer network embedded in a resume like that is completely unquantifiable. Yet even with that towering resume, we have to highlight the unseen forces once again. H.W. Bush's father, Prescott Bush, laid serious foundational work, serving a full decade as a senator from Connecticut. But listen to this incredible quote from Barbara Bush regarding H.W.'s mother, Dorothy Walker Bush. She said Dorothy had 10 times more influence on her son George than his father did. Dorothy was born into a very wealthy family of bankers and was heavily active in local welfare agencies. Much like we saw with Abigail Adams and Rose Kennedy, the mother in this dynasty was identified as the true driving force behind the man who would eventually take the Oval Office and subsequently set up the next generation. To wrap up our analysis today, let's actively review this playbook we've watched evolve from the 1700s right up to the 2000s. Step 1. Amass generational wealth and corporate connections. We saw this move from tobacco plantations all the way to real estate and banking. Step 2. Secure foundational, appointed, or local political offices to build an untouchable resume and a deep network of allies. And step 3, transition maternal influence from private consultation into active, relentless public campaigning. This is the exact 3-step framework that built the most powerful families in American history. We've seen how meticulously these dynasties are engineered across centuries, and honestly, the blueprints only seem to become more sophisticated. So it leaves us with a pretty massive question. As long as there is power to be held, will the true architects of tomorrow's presidents continue to be their parents? It's definitely something to keep in mind the next time you're looking at a candidate on a debate stage. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep seeking out the structures behind the stories, and I'll see you next time.